Welcome back. How long have you been watching my channel? Let me know below.
They say every family has that one person they talk about when they think no one's listening. The one they silently pity at holidays. The one they use to make themselves feel better about their own messes. For mine, that person was me. It didn't matter that I had a good job, that I lived alone in a nice apartment, or that I'd survived more heartbreak than they could fathom without crumbling. To them, I was the unmarried daughter at 42, the one who never settled down, never gave them grandkids, never brought a man to Thanksgiving dinner. In my mother's world, that made me broken. In my father's, it made me invisible. And in my sister Claire's smug suburban universe, it made me a punchline. I still remember that dinner. The air reeked of overcooked turkey and the kind of judgment that seeps in from decades of buried resentment. My mom had arranged the table just like she always did. Labels facing out on the wine bottles, cloth napkins folded like fans, and my place card wedged just a little further from the centerpiece than everyone else's. My father sat in his usual chair, nursing a scotch like it was the only thing keeping him from telling us what he really thought. Claire sat next to him with her perfect teeth and her perfect blowout, beaming like the damn Macy's parade balloon she was. Her husband and 2 daughters by her side, like props in a picture she'd been curating for years. I was sitting across from them, swirling a glass of Pinot that tasted like vinegar, trying to ignore the pointed glances every time someone mentioned family or tradition or the next generation. Claire was mid-story about her youngest making the honor roll, again, when she looked over at me and smirked. You know, Mom's just waiting for Lena to finally settle so she can die in peace. The table erupted in that performative laughter people do when they don't want to admit something's mean. I smiled too, because what the hell else do you do in moments like that? You smile, you pretend it's fine. You act like being reduced to a running joke by your own blood doesn't burn like acid in your chest. I didn't say a word that night. I helped with the dishes, hugged my nieces, complimented the damn green bean casserole, and drove back to my apartment in silence. But when I got home and shut the door behind me, I didn't drop my coat or kick off my shoes like I usually did. I just stood there, staring at the framed photo on the hallway table, me at 32, standing in front of the Eiffel Tower with a grin that still looked hopeful. 10 years. 10 years of swallowing disappointment and pretending the silence didn't get louder each time I saw another wedding invitation or ultrasound photo. I walked to the mirror. The overhead light was unkind, exposing the lines around my eyes and the tiredness I couldn't seem to shake anymore. But under it all, I saw something else. Something steady. Something done with waiting. I whispered, barely loud enough to hear it myself. You're not a leftover. You're the whole damn meal. And in that moment, I believed it. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I took a day off work just for me. I walked downtown, bought myself the biggest, sparkliest diamond ring I could afford without overdrawing my account, and asked the jeweler to wrap it like it was for someone else. I didn't cry, I didn't second guess. I just smiled, thanked him, and walked out with a weight in my purse that felt like liberation. Later that night, with a glass of wine in one hand and my phone in the other, I staged the moment like any engagement photo you've seen on Instagram. Hand slightly tilted, the ring catching the light just so, and the caption, I said yes, to me. I hit post. Then I turned off my phone. When I checked again an hour later, the comments were already rolling in. Some were confused, a few were cruel, but most were curious. And one, from my sister Claire, read simply, "This isn't funny." I stared at it for a long time. That same voice from dinner, the same smirk disguised as concern. And this time, I didn't smile. I replied, "It's not a joke. It's freedom." Then I blocked her. I didn't owe anyone an explanation. Not Claire, not my parents, not the old co-workers from my 20s who would now dissect my post over group chats like they were analyzing a tabloid scandal. That night, I opened a new browser tab, searched flights to Bali, and booked the soonest one I could find. One way, no return. If I was going to reclaim my life, I was going to do it on a beach halfway around the world, with no one watching except the sun and maybe a few curious monkeys. I thought I was just taking a trip. I didn't know I was about to unravel the truth about my family, myself, and a past I thought I'd buried for good. But that came later. Right now, I was just a woman in an apartment, packing a suitcase with more hope than luggage. And as I zipped it shut, my phone buzzed again. I almost ignored it, but something made me look. One notification. A message from someone I hadn't heard from in nearly 20 years. One name that stopped my breath. Eli. And just like that, my self-engagement turned into something else entirely. There's something peculiar about watching the world misinterpret your rebellion as a cry for attention, like tossing a match into a forest to stay warm and then being blamed for the fire. When I posted that ring on Instagram, carefully positioned on my left hand with just enough light to catch the facets of the stone, I knew I wasn't going to be able to control the reaction. But I also knew I didn't want to. Because for the first time in over a decade, I didn't want to be liked. I wanted to be seen. Within minutes, the comments started rolling in. At first, it was the usual crowd, college friends I hadn't spoken to in years, co-workers who barely remembered my last name, the kind of people who smile too hard at office parties and drink wine like it's the only thing keeping them from unraveling. OMG, congrats! So happy for you. Finally! Some were sweet, some were nosy, and a few were tinged with confusion, like they were trying to recall a boyfriend I'd never introduced, or a fiancé I'd managed to keep hidden through sheer will and privacy settings. The DMs were worse. A handful of men I hadn't heard from since my 20s crawled out of the woodwork like cockroaches after a blackout. Some congratulating, some probing, and at least one asking if I was really off the market now or just playing. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. But the message that stopped me wasn't from some guy looking for a second chance or a stranger fishing for details. It was from Claire, just 5 words. This isn't funny, Lena. Not congrats. Not who is he. Not even what's going on. Just cold, calculated disapproval. I imagined her sitting in her kitchen, probably sipping from her world's best mom mug, scowling at her phone with that look she always gave me when I said something that didn't fit neatly into her box of suburban expectations. I could see it so clearly it almost made me laugh. But I didn't laugh, not this time. I stared at her message for a few seconds, then typed out my reply with fingers that didn't tremble even a little. It's not a joke, it's freedom. I hit send, then I blocked her. The relief that followed was almost too fast, too sharp, like finally pulling a splinter that's been festering under your skin for years, and realizing it didn't hurt as much as you thought it would. That night, I sat on my couch, lights low, the city humming outside my window, and I poured myself a second glass of wine, not to celebrate, but to process. I wasn't celebrating anything. I hadn't won. I hadn't gotten the fairy tale ending or the doting husband or the 2 kids with alphabet names and a mortgage we could barely afford. But what I had was mine. And for once, that felt like enough. I thought about all the times my family had looked at me like I was a problem to be solved. When I was 30 and broke off an engagement with a man I didn't love, my mother didn't ask if I was okay. She asked if I was sure. When I turned 35 and froze my eggs, my father called it selfish, as if preserving my options was some kind of affront to their timeline. When Claire got married and I stood beside her in a seafoam green dress that made me look like a melted crayon, she thanked me for not making a scene, as if simply existing without a date was a form of protest. The next morning, I woke up with a hangover and a craving for something new, not just a change of scenery, but a full reset. A clean slate so far removed from Ohio that the word leftover couldn't reach me, no matter how loudly it echoed from the mouths of people who never really knew me to begin with. I opened my laptop, typed flights to Bali into the search bar, and didn't think twice when I saw a direct flight leaving in 3 days. One way, no return. I booked it. Then I sat there staring at the confirmation email, heart pounding like I'd just done something illegal. It wasn't until I started packing that I realized how light I felt, like shedding armor I didn't know I'd been wearing. I folded clothes I hadn't touched in years, packed a swimsuit I hadn't dared wear since my 30s, and tossed in the engagement ring like it was just another accessory, because that's all it was. A symbol. Not of love, but of rebellion. As I zipped my suitcase, I checked my phone one last time. That's when I saw it. Another notification buried among the clutter. A name I hadn't read in over 2 decades. Eli. Just that. No subject line. No preview text. Just his name, sitting there like a ghost I hadn't invited but who always knew where to find me. My stomach twisted, the kind of twist that isn't quite pain but isn't comfort either. The kind you get when you remember a lie you told yourself and almost believed. I didn't open the message. Not then. Not yet. Instead, I closed my eyes, listened to the low hum of the city fading into the night, and whispered to no one, "This isn't about him." But deep down, I knew better. It was always about him, or what he took, or what I gave, or what we both left behind, like a wound we never let heal. The ring wasn't just about me. The trip wasn't just about escape. And the freedom I kept shouting about, it was starting to sound a lot like denial. There's something strangely quiet about arriving in paradise with a suitcase full of contradictions, especially when the person stepping off the plane isn't quite sure whether she's running toward something or away from everything. The Bali air hit me like warm silk, thick with incense and a kind of peaceful indifference that felt almost confrontational. The driver I'd arranged ahead of time was holding a laminated sign with my name, but even the sight of it felt surreal, like I'd slipped into someone else's life. I wasn't a bride on her honeymoon. I wasn't a spiritual seeker chasing healing in yoga poses and turmeric smoothies. I was just a woman in her 40s with a self-gifted engagement ring, a middle finger extended in every direction, and a family waiting back home to pounce on whatever came next. And yet, for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel obligated to explain myself to anyone. The villa I'd booked was tucked behind a row of overgrown hibiscus and bamboo, quiet and private, with a pool that looked like it had been painted into the earth. The man who handed me the keys smiled the way people do when they don't care why you're there. And God, that was refreshing. No one asking what my husband did, no one wondering where the kids were, no one glancing at my left hand and expecting a story that involved cake, vows, and a house in the suburbs. For once, I could breathe without editing my own narrative. On the second morning, I wandered into a local market, still groggy from jet lag, and the kind of mental fog that only comes after too many years of pretending everything is fine. I was examining a carved wooden bowl when a Balinese woman, maybe in her 50s, walked over and gestured toward my hand. Her smile was gentle, kind, unassuming. "You just marry?" she asked in broken English, pointing at the ring. For a second I hesitated, then I nodded. "Yes," I said, smiling back, "to myself." She didn't flinch, just nodded slowly and touched her chest. "Very good, heart first, then world." I don't know why, but I nearly cried. Maybe it was the jet lag. Maybe it was the exhaustion of a decade's worth of disappointment catching up to me all at once. Or maybe, for the first time in forever, someone finally got it. That same afternoon, I was lying by the pool, nursing a coconut and thinking of absolutely nothing when my phone buzzed. I debated ignoring it, already feeling the sting of regret for bringing it at all. But curiosity, like a damn parasite, always finds its way in. I unlocked it. Another post from Claire, a filtered shot of her kids holding signs that read, "Real love wins," in front of a church. The caption was vague enough to be innocent, but sharp enough to be pointed. "Love built on truth lasts longer than anything fake." A dozen likes, 3 comments about how adorable her girls were. No one called it what it was. Spite dressed up in motherhood, cruelty disguised as content. I stared at it for a full minute, the tropical breeze suddenly feeling colder than it should have. Then I made a decision. If they were going to turn my story into a spectacle, then I was going to give them something worth watching. I reached out to a local photographer I'd found online, one who specialized in honeymoon shoots. I didn't explain the situation. I didn't need to. I just booked a session, chose the most ridiculous sunset backdrop he had, and prepared myself for what would be the most elaborately staged revenge since the Trojan horse. The next evening, I walked barefoot through the sand, wearing a flowing white dress I'd bought that day for $20 at a market, hair tousled by the ocean, skin glowing in the gold of Bali's relentless dusk. The photographer was polite, efficient, barely asked any questions. I posed like a woman in love, gazing at my ring, laughing into the breeze, closing my eyes as if someone's hands were wrapped around my waist. I felt like a fraud, but I also felt powerful. Every shot was a message. Every frame was a mirror held up to a family that never really saw me. I posted 3 of the best ones that night, tagging them #honeymoonvibes and writing a caption that simply read, "Learning to love someone who never leaves me." I knew it would set off a reaction. I wanted it to. And it did. The likes poured in. Old friends messaged me congratulations. Claire's silence screamed louder than any comment could. But amidst all that noise, one message cut through everything. It was from my mother. It read, "Can we please meet your fiancé when you're back? I think your father's finally coming around." I didn't know whether to laugh or throw my phone into the pool. Not a single word about me, not a question about how I was. Just another performance request, another attempt to parade me in front of relatives like a trophy they'd finally managed to fix. For a moment, I hovered over the reply box, my thumbs trembling with the weight of decades. Then I typed just 5 words. "There is no damn fiancé," and I hit send. I set the phone down and stared at the pool, the reflection of palm trees swaying in the water like truths that never sit still. I felt something break open inside me, something that wasn't pain exactly, but wasn't peace either. A release, and the moment you stop trying to explain yourself to people who never listened in the first place. It should have felt like triumph. It didn't. As I turned to go inside, the light from my phone flickered again. Another message, another ghost. Eli, this time I opened it. Just 2 lines. "I'm in Bali, saw your photos. Can we talk?" I stood there barefoot in the doorway of a borrowed villa on the edge of the world and realized that no matter how far I'd flown, some ghosts carried passports too. When someone from your past reappears after nearly 2 decades of silence, there's no preparation that can brace you for the sudden weight of memory, especially when that person is the very man who left you bleeding emotionally on a bathroom floor, whispering promises of a future one day, and disappearing the next without the decency of explanation or closure. Eli's message was short, almost absurdly casual, as if we were ex-colleagues arranging a coffee catch-up instead of 2 people bound by a history so bruised it still lived in the marrow of my bones. "I'm in Bali, saw your photos. Can we talk?" It hung on my screen like a challenge, and for a full hour I paced the villa barefoot, each step a silent war between rage, confusion, and a bitterness I thought I had long since swallowed. I didn't respond immediately, not because I was above it, but because I wasn't sure what version of me would walk into that meeting if I agreed. The woman I'd spent years trying to build, independent and resilient, or the girl who once cried into a cracked phone, begging a man who already had 1 foot out the door not to leave. In the end, curiosity won, as it often does with wounds that never really healed. I replied with the name of a beach cafe near my villa, and a time 2 hours later, then stared at myself in the mirror, wondering whether to dress for war or indifference. The cafe was perched on a cliff, the kind of place designed for honeymooners and hopefuls, all candlelit tables and ocean views, and a menu that offered love potions in cocktail form. I arrived early and chose a seat in the corner, where I could see him before he saw me. The moment he appeared, I felt my chest tighten, not because he looked particularly remarkable, but because he looked the same, like the universe hadn't bothered to punish him with age the way it had weathered me with lines and regrets, and the kind of strength you earn only through surviving. He spotted me quickly, smiled that crooked, too easy smile that used to melt my resolve, and walked over with the casual confidence of a man who had no idea just how much damage he'd done. "Lena," he said, sliding into the chair across from me like we were old friends instead of cautionary tales. "You look incredible." I wanted to slap him, or laugh, or cry, but instead I tilted my head and said, You still flatter like you're trying to sell me something." He chuckled, not ashamed, not surprised. "You haven't changed." "That's where you're wrong," I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. "I've changed more than you could possibly imagine." The small talk that followed was clumsy, filled with the kind of hollow pleasantries that people who were once intimate struggle to summon after a chasm of years. He told me about his divorce, 2 years ago, apparently amicable. He had no kids, though there had been close calls. He was doing well, traveling, investing in startups, soul-searching, whatever the hell that meant. And then, after the drinks arrived, he leaned in, eyes soft, voice lowered. "I saw your post, the engagement. At first I thought it was a joke, but then I looked again and, I don't know, it made me think." Of course it did. I sipped my drink, refusing to rescue him from his own hesitation. He continued slower now, like every word was being weighed. "I thought about us, about what I did, about what I didn't do. I was young and scared, and I know that doesn't excuse anything, but I've spent years wondering if I'd stayed, would things have been different?" That question hit me harder than I expected, because the truth was I had asked myself the same thing 100 different ways over the years. Usually at night, in the dark, when doubt crawls into bed beside you and whispers all the versions of your life that never happened. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I looked at the ocean, the endless black of it stretching toward horizon I couldn't see, and I said, "You didn't just leave me, you left me at my lowest. You left when I needed someone to say, 'This isn't the end,' and you made it the end." He nodded, shame finally touching his expression, but not enough to satisfy me. "I know I was a coward who took something from me I never got back," I said. And there was no tremble in my voice this time, only the weight of an unspoken truth I'd carried too long. "You don't get to show up here and pretend it's nostalgia. You ghosted me after I lost our child. And now you want what, forgiveness? Closure? Another chance?" He opened his mouth, closed it, then looked down at his hands like they held all the answers he didn't know how to speak. "I just thought maybe we could talk, start over as friends or more." That's when I laughed. Not cruelly, but honestly, the kind of laugh that comes when you realize just how far you've come from the person who once waited by the phone for a man like this. I leaned forward, lowering my voice so only he could hear it. "Eli, I didn't come to Bali for you. I didn't post that ring for attention. I did it because I was tired of waiting for someone else to give my life meaning. You were a chapter, a painful one, but I closed that book a long time ago." He sat back as if my words had physically moved him. "So that's it?" "No," I said, standing up, reaching for my bag. "That's the beginning." And as I walked away from the table, I didn't look back, not once, because ghosts only have power when you let them follow you home, and I wasn't going back to that haunted house ever again. There's a moment that arrives quietly, often when you least expect it, like a whisper you almost mistake for wind. When the realization settles in, that freedom, for all its seductive allure and poetic weight, does not always come dressed in triumph or drenched in sunlight, but sometimes walks in barefoot and solemn, wearing grief like a second skin. I had come to Bali convinced that I was taking back control, that by placing a ring on my own finger and staging a fabricated love story for the sake of vindication, I would sever every invisible string still tying me to the version of myself my family refused to let evolve. But now, days after Eli's departure, and nights into a silence that echoed louder than the crashing waves outside my villa, I began to wonder whether what I was calling liberation had simply become another disguise, another costume worn over a bruise I hadn't yet allowed myself to examine. On the morning of my last full day in Bali, I found myself walking a narrow path that snaked along the cliffs, led by impulse rather than intention, barefoot in a cotton dress that clung to my skin with the humidity of early light. The trail was quiet, speckled with wildflowers and small shrines draped in yellow cloth and marigolds. And as I walked, I felt something inside me soften, though I wasn't sure whether it was resolve or resentment. At the top of the cliff stood a small temple, ancient and weather-worn, guarded not by tourists or monks, but by time itself. And I sat there for what must have been an hour, knees folded beneath me, heart steady for once, mind tangled in the vines of old memories I had worked so hard to pretend no longer mattered. I remembered the day I lost the baby. I hadn't let myself revisit it in years, choosing instead to talk around it. Like one of those stories your family knows, but never dares to mention, wrapped in silence and buried under pleasantries. I remembered sitting on the floor of the bathroom, the cold tiles against my back, Eli's footsteps retreating as he answered a call from work, and how I bit into my fist to keep from screaming. I remembered not the pain of the loss, though it had been immense, but the absence that followed, not just of a child, but of understanding, of compassion, of anyone acknowledging what had been taken from me before I ever had a chance to hold it. And perhaps that was the true betrayal. Not that he left, but that he made it feel like it had never happened at all. I didn't cry, not there, not in front of stone gods and silent winds, but I closed my eyes, placed my hand over my chest, and whispered her name, June. The name I had chosen, the one I never spoke aloud to anyone else. It wasn't for closure. Closure is a myth we tell ourselves to justify endings. It was simply acknowledgement, a name given to a ghost I'd carried for too long without giving her breath. When I descended from the cliff, the sun had begun its slow arc toward evening, painting the sky in bruises and fire. I returned to the villa and opened my messages, scanning past the dozens of notifications from people reacting to my honeymoon posts, skipping past a second message from Eli that I didn't bother reading, and instead opened the one that had arrived an hour earlier from my mother. It said quite simply, "Why do you always have to make everything so difficult?" There was no punctuation, no warmth, no curiosity, just another reminder that my pain was always an inconvenience in someone else's narrative. I stared at it, thumb hovering over the keyboard, then decided I didn't owe her a speech or a final act of justification. Instead, I opened my suitcase, retrieved the ring box, and tucked it into a small envelope with a handwritten note. It read, "Give this to Claire. Maybe one day her daughters will understand that love doesn't have to look like performance." I left the envelope with the concierge, addressed and paid for international shipping, and walked away without checking twice. That night, I stood by the pool, watching the moon ripple over the surface like a mirror that refused to lie. My reflection looked tired, not in the way that demands rest, but in the way that reveals just how long you've been carrying a story no one bothered to read. I turned my phone to airplane mode, tossed it into a drawer, and let the silence swell. And then, just before dawn, I found myself writing, not for social media, not for revenge, but for me. A letter I would never send, addressed to the version of myself I left behind in Ohio. I wrote about the shame that wasn't mine to carry, the strength it took to walk away without applause, and the quiet victory of choosing yourself even when no one claps. When the sun rose, I didn't feel reborn. I didn't feel transformed or redeemed or enlightened. I just felt awake. But as I packed the last of my things, folding clothes into the suitcase that now felt lighter for reasons I couldn't fully explain, my phone buzzed one last time. One missed call, a voicemail from a number I didn't recognize, but that area code, I knew it. I played the message. It was my doctor's office. Routine follow-up, they said. Blood work results. Something they wanted to discuss. I didn't call back. Not then. Instead, I stepped outside into the morning heat, let the sun hit my face, and whispered, "Not yet." Because some truths aren't ready to be spoken, and maybe, just maybe, freedom isn't about escaping, proving, or erasing. Maybe freedom is simply about choosing your own silence and refusing to let anyone else define what fills it.